What is up, everybody, and welcome. In today's video, well, we're finally doing it, guys. The time is here. We have ourselves another Maker Showcase, and by God, I'll be damned if it's not one of the best we've ever had the privilege to see come across this table. We're looking at Black Snow Customs. Oh my goodness. I have been into these knives ever since the first moment I laid eyes on them. Way back, it was the Sabotage model in particular. Way back when I started collecting. Well, I say way back, it was 2016. It wasn't so far ago. But way back in 2016 when I started collecting, the Sabotage absolutely stole my heart. And it was just a matter of time before I finally got to experience one myself. And it took a lot longer than expected, to be honest. Had a few offered up to come across the table for the channel over the years and just sort of never came to fruition. And then ultimately I missed G10, so I wasn't even able to at least, try the knives for myself at a show, let alone obviously do a video. But of course, we can always rely on the man, the myth, the legend. It is Heels with Steel. Mike, I cannot thank you enough for sending these knives along. What an honor. What a privilege. And not only do we just have sort of one knife that we get to go over, we actually get to go through the whole gambit. We've got two pieces here. I'm just so freaking excited. So what we're going to do in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about sort of the knives generally and about the maker generally, and then we'll sort of jump into the knives as well. Now, we're going to go ahead and start with the aesthetics as we usually do. You can see here we are going to give some white gloves treatment to these suckers and give you guys a nice close-up look of the knives before we really kick things off here. What that's going to do is both give you some perspective for some of the things that I'm going to say about Nati, the maker, Nati Amor. And it will also, let us take a nice close look at the knives before ultimately I cover them in fingerprints. Both of these knives are working with polished zirconium bolsters. So as you can imagine, we're going to want to get a nice solid look at those before we muddy these knives up with our hands. So let's go ahead and wipe down this Sabotage now. This is a mini Sabotage. So in terms of the knives that Nati makes, Nati Amor, he does go by Black Snow Customs for his knives. He makes two models at this time. He makes the Sabotage and the Opiate. The Opiate's the knife that I put aside. Now, he does make the Sabotage in two sizes. This is going to be the mini. The full size is rather large. As you can see, the mini's pretty large itself. And it's very humid today, so forgive me as I do my best here. So yeah, he's got the two models. There is no mini Opiate just yet, but there have been whispers of one coming along. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this thing. This particular mini Sabotage, we are working with black Damascus scales and polished zirconium bolsters. The finish work on these knives, absolutely unbelievable. You can see here we've got a beautiful floating zirconium backspacer. Apparently the white glove treatment is not enough to keep this thing spick and span, but you can see absolutely exquisite zirconium pocket clip as well. Beautiful black Damascus collars. Handmade zirconium screws. And this Damascus steel blade. What? Fully polished out with a nice light etch. Look at that thing. Holy cow. And again, we'll sort of talk more about the blade and the knife in general in a moment, but right now we just want to take a nice close look at these aesthetics. The amazing finish work. You can just sort of see the way light plays off of this knife as we twirl it and rotate it. And you can see the mini, pretty good size. Again, we'll get into that later. Let's go ahead and take a look at the opiate. This one should be a little bit easier to clean up just because at least the scales are micarta. They are polished micarta, polished to an extreme, but won't quite pick up fingerprints the way metals will. As you can see here, again, that zirconium finished to perfection. Beautiful polished micarta. Look at that. So shiny for such a rugged material. Again, another full-length zirconium floating spacer, zirconium clip. The blade is insane. Let me wipe this down as well. Now, I'm actually really happy this is not like a Damasteel or anything, because you can see that amazing hand-rub satin that Nati's able to pull off. Look at that. Oh, you want to talk about satin, guys? That is a fucking satin finish. Holy shit. That right there, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, is what satin should look like. Oh, yeah. That's the good stuff. That's the good stuff. Look at how much moisture is coming through the glove. That's insane. It is way too humid. But yeah, that hand rub satin is astounding. Absolutely astounding. All right, now that we've got little bits of shit everywhere, let's go ahead and jump in here. So really, we're taking a look at a few different things. So the aesthetics of the knife. Now, Nati, as a maker, comes to us from the land of jewelry. He's actually a jeweler. I believe his career spans a couple of decades. That might have just been hearsay. I didn't actually get to check up on that before filming the video, but it's been a long time. Definitely a full career as a jeweler, and some of you may be familiar with you could say his counterpart in knife making, Lee Lerman. Both of these gentlemen do hail from Israel, and it was Lee Lerman, who of course is already a knife maker, who managed to pull his friend Nati into the knife making game. Now, this is really interesting because we get the amazing touch and finishing abilities and just attention to detail that you get from a jeweler in knives. And so again, when you take a look at this knife, like something like this opiate, I've never seen anyone finish micarta to a mirror polish. I mean, you can sort of see, obviously it's a textured, it's a rough textured material, so it's not actually going to be a mirror polish. But you can see here, if you look at the objects that are mirrored in the zirconium, those objects are still visible in the micarta. So, I mean, it really is as close to a mirror as you're ever going to get out of a material that's as rough and robust and textured as micarta. I mean, really, just look at the way the light rises over. I mean, it's phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. And so we're talking again about finish work that's just to a level you really don't get to see very often. I mean, there's makers out there doing this stuff, but boy howdy, they're not very common. And so you start to get the sense of, one, sort of why Nati's work has garnered such extreme prices, particularly so early in his career. You really get a picture for that right off the bat. As soon as you hold a knife in your hand, you're like, oh, okay. It's because he's putting so much time into hand finishing all the details of the knife. It really is exceptional. Now, the flip side of that is when you get somebody that puts all that time into, the way the knife looks and everything, those makers are not always the best when it comes to mechanics. And so something that I was always concerned about looking at Nati's knives was, okay, they're beautiful and everything, but when I finally get one in my hand, am I still going to love it? Is it still going to be everything that, I hope for and that I enjoy in knives, whether that's to do with the action or the carryability or whatever? That's obviously a concern. And so I'm super happy to report that it's just not an issue. The action on the opiate is something that we'll get into when we get to that knife in particular. I guess we can go ahead and go over the actions now since I brought it up. So on the Sabotage, it's kind of interesting because it's really, really good. And again, just before I continue, there's always the disclaimer of every knife is different. These knives are completely hand-built, 100% built by hand. And so, different people, when they buy a custom knife, they might request a weak detent or a strong detent, or, some people want their knife to drop shut, some people don't. I'm sure Nati has taken that into consideration when filling orders. And so just sort of take it with a grain of salt that every knife is different. And so, if you're buying a knife from the secondary market, I don't want you to come back here and say, well, Tyler said that, this knife had drop shut or whatever, and this other one doesn't. It has a weak detent or what have you. Every knife is different, so bear that in mind. But we are going to be talking about these knives in regards to the work in general. So as far as this particular mini Sabotage is concerned, pretty medium strength detent, nothing overzealous or anything like that. But what you do have is really great leverage. Now, this flipper tab is upswept, which is usually something that I'm opposed to. And while it's not my favorite, you can see the jimping here is a pretty flat surface. And ultimately, you don't have to get up here and pull down on the flipper tab. You can see that that's not very effective anyway. Really what you're doing here is just pushing on that flat spot and getting deployment in that sense. So it does function very well. Although it is definitely more of a push button than a light switch. Obviously, if you grip the end and you pull like a light switch, it's definitely going to flip. But definitely, if you push on it, you really get that faster deployment. But again, super solid deployment. Definitely, I would just call it standard, right? It's very good. It feels very comfortable. It's not overly strong. It's not overly Thorburn thwackish either. It's kind of right in the middle, and it's in a good spot. So I definitely appreciate that. Now, of course, we do have a front heavy blade. Anytime you have a front heavy blade, it's sort of expected, especially in the custom knife world, that you should pretty easily be able to get a drop shut action. It doesn't take too much effort if you're using bearings and you polish everything correctly. Generally speaking, if you have that front heavy blade, you're going to have an easier time with that drop shut action. Of course, that's something that we all learned from the Norsemen. So I grant you that it does benefit from its blade shape, but of course, that doesn't change the fact that it closes soft, smooth, consistent, and on its own accord. So absolutely great fidget factor, beautiful knife. Super fun to play with. Now, the other aspect to the action on this one is going to be the detent geometry. Now, you can see here, this is the actual point where the tang is making contact with the detent. Now, you can see the knife is about 25% closed at this point. So we do have all of this room between the detent. You can see kind of how far, this much wiggle room. And with that flipper tab, what that does mean is when you go to close the knife, you pretty much have to move over the lock bar, go to close it. Flipper tab will catch on your finger and the detent. Then you kind of move yourself out of the way. And you can kind of pull the flipper tab or push on the spine, however you want to do it. So that is something that maybe not the absolute best, but it is something that he did take into consideration on the opiate. So I'm very excited to get to that in just a moment. But again, before we move away from these knives as a pair, let's take a look again at these collars. I just want you to see on the Sabotage, they are perfectly flush. You can see they're like a perfect match to that zirconium, and he's done a really spectacular job. And then you can see the micarta one has a little bit more of a curve to it, but still just fitted very nicely. I just wanted to point out the collars. You know, these pivots, these zirconium pivots are custom. The collars are handmade. I just think he does a fantastic job. Something else that you'll notice from his design language, obviously with both models, the clips are very similar. And you sort of have that same shape, right? That sort of front heavy design with that forward curve, almost like a dolphin shape, if you will. And so that's something that he's obviously got in his design language. And then in addition to that, you'll notice a space between the bolsters and the scales. And I'm given to understand that the purpose of this is partially it's just design, and frankly, I think it's cool design. I like, you know, a little bit of, like, he's got the shadow boxing going on and stuff with the Sabotage, and I like a little bit of that. I think some people see this and they, you know, they're a little concerned about it. It's like, oh, what, you couldn't make it flush? He can make it flush, but again, he is doing all of this by hand, and so then it's a question of, all right, well, I like the way this design looks. It makes it a little bit easier for me to put the knife together, so, you know, why wouldn't I do that maybe and save myself a little bit of time, be able to give more knives out to the world, but also have sort of a unique design feature. So I do know that there is some criticism of him having the space between his scales and his bolsters, but frankly, it's not a problem for me. I quite enjoy that uniqueness. So you guys can see there are some factors that are similar. Again, similar pivots, similar collars, similar clips, similar, you know, spacing, similar sort of forward design. But again, he's only been through 2 knives, so it'll be really interesting to see what the third model is that comes from Nati. Hopefully we will see a mini opiate, because as we get to this knife, you'll start to see how truly big it really is. It's more of a toy than like a EDC for sure. But the mini Sabotage, I think, is a perfect size, and so I could see the mini opiate translating in that way pretty well. I think these knives do well as a smaller size, and of course, again, this isn't particularly too small. It's just smaller than the full size version. But again, as I mentioned, all these knives are fully hand built. He does come from a career in jewel making, and you absolutely can sort of get that vibe from the knives, and I really understand the price point now. You know, it was tough for me at first. It's always tough, you know, when somebody's trying to price out a knife that's completely handmade, because there is so much work and so much effort that goes into it, you know, but then maybe the precision's not as great. The precision is very high here. The finishing is very high. You can tell just every knife. And if you watch his videos on Instagram, you can see how delicately he handles everything and how much effort and passion goes into making these things. But feeling the end product and getting... I've had these knives on loan for almost 2 months now. I've been very fortunate, again, to have Mike sending these along. And so I've gotten to play with them for quite a substantial amount of time. And you really just... The excitement and the allure and the impressiveness does not go away. It doesn't fade at all. These knives are absolutely stellar. And so, yeah, so just amazing work by Nati in general. Let's go ahead and sort of jump into each model individually, because there are some interesting things that I want to talk to you guys about. So we already went over the action on the Sabotage. Let's go ahead and talk about this blade a little bit. So first of all, I am biased. This might be my favorite knife model of all time. This shape is not going to be for everyone, and we are discussing this as a piece of art and as a sculpture rather than as, you know, a tool that you're actually going to put in your pocket and take to the construction site. Like, if I see a single comment down in the comment section like, yeah, but it doesn't cut an orange very well, like, get the fuck out. You're watching the wrong video, my friend. So anyway, I love this shit. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. I love this crazy blade shape. But it does have some details that maybe aren't apparent at first. The first of which is that you can see we do have a hollow grind right here towards the rear of the blade. Nice, beautiful hollow grind. If you follow that grind line, it kind of comes up here and then it fades away right about here. Now, as you progress towards the front of the knife, this absolute tip is... It's very difficult to see, but it's convex. Let's see if I can show you. It's very hard to see, but the blade does become convex towards the very tip. I mean, maybe if not convex, then flat, but because it does come to a tip here, it has that bulbous shaping to it. And you can kind of just see there, that's the taskbar on my computer. That's supposed to be straight. You can see how it's curved, but it's not curved inward. It's not concave like the hollow grind on this end. It's actually convex. So it's very slight. It's not, it's not overly done or anything. It's not something you would really particularly notice without focusing on the knife. But there is just a ever so subtle convexness to this area right here. And man, for a knife to go from for a blade to go from concave to convex just in that way, absolutely blows me away. I'm so in love with this blade. It's insane. There's just clearly so much work done to it, so much attention, and it's all, done by hand. This amazing grind. Like, how do you grind that by hand consistently and match it on both sides? I mean, that's just incredible. There you go. You can kind of see it in the reflections. Absolutely incredible. So I have so much respect for this blade shape. It's insane. Now, as we continue to look, there are other beautiful details. We do have a gorgeous crowned spine. And of course, we'll take another look at that etch. Roll it over to that crowned spine. Look at the spine, the beautiful etch down the spine. And on this knife, we also have external stop pins. Now, it's very cool the way this is designed. So you have these external stop pins, and again, we have shadow boxing on this knife. You can see the titanium liner exposed beneath the scale. Now, if you look at the bolsters from this direction, you can see the bolster is not matched to the scale like it is on most knives, right? Like this knife, the scale and the bolster are all sort of matched together. It's all flush. It's not like that here. You can see the bolsters are like a completely... They match up to here, and then as soon as the stop pin starts, they make way for the stop pin, the external stop pin track. And you can see these little pointed parts kind of come out. And so you get to watch the stop pin sort of rides. It's sort of like on the inside. You can follow it along here. And then they come to a rest right there. And so you can see they're kind of hidden behind the bolster. I just think it's so cool that he was just like, yeah, fuck it, right? Like the bolster doesn't need to match. Like I'll do an external stop pin track and, I'll kind of tuck it in behind the bolsters. I just think it's so cool. So anyway, obviously I'm enamored by this design. You can see he has drilled straight through for a lanyard, if that's what you're into. Again, full-length floating backspacer. And I just can't say enough good things about this knife. I really think it's spectacular. Again, the geometry with the flipper tab and everything, even though it has a fantastic action, it does have a little bit of, you got to fuck around with it a little bit and pull on that flipper tab to get it past the detent. But again, for being his first ever knife model, like, this guy hasn't been making knives that long, guys. There's only so many of these. I mean, this one right here is number 27. This is the 27th knife that he's made. I think that they're numbered the knife, not the knife model, because it just says Black Snow number 27. And so, like, really? This is 27 knives into your career? Are you fucking kidding me? This is amazing. This is the best. It's the best. I wanted to have more eloquence when I made this video, but I knew I wouldn't be able to do it because I'm so enamored by these knives. I mean, really, anybody who's been following the channel for a long time knows that Andre Thorburn is my favorite maker, and that has not changed. I have a lot of love for Andre for things outside of his knives and everything, and so that's great. But, I mean, really, these knives have completely stolen my heart, and I think Nati's making some of the best handmade only knives out there on the market. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. So again, the Sabotage, the way you hold it, kind of interesting. Obviously with the saber grip here, it's not going to be the most effective shape, but if you do pinch grip the knife, I mean, I see no reason why you can't cut whatever you want to cut with this thing. So if I had $5,000 burning a hole in my pocket, I fucking know where I'd be spending it right now. I can tell you guys that much. So, of course, the Mini Sabotage, going to be one of my favorite models ever. absolutely amazing, great showing. But I think a lot of some interesting factors come into play when you look at his next model. So the first thing anybody's going to say when they see the opiate is like, really? Like, okay, like it's let's be real, guys. It's not really the best knife. This blade shape is pretty weird. It's like a big cleaver. We all know that cleaver knives in the market, they do well. They do well when, it's a big custom maker or whatever, and whatever. People buy them because they're fun and they're cool, but obviously this is not going to make like a super great EDC. If we look at the actual size of the knife, this is my whole fist, and this is the blade. Like, the blade is almost the size of the back of my fist. Of course, you can choke up on that finger choil, but again, look how big that is in my hand. It is so substantial. Now, we talked about the action on the Sabotage. A couple things that we said. One was, obviously, if you have a large front-heavy blade, getting a drop shot action shouldn't be too much of a problem. And you can see that's not a problem here at all. The blade almost closes itself like a magnet. I'm going to slice open my fucking hand while I'm at it. So obviously it really doesn't take much to get this blade to drop shut because I'm almost cutting my finger with it. But when you have a very thick, very front heavy, or just heavy in general blade on a big knife like this, it is an absolute, what's the word? There's a particular word I'm looking for. I can't think of it, but it's very common, especially when you look at custom knives, custom makers. They get these huge front heavy blades, and then they put a normal detent on it. And I'm sorry, but your blade has to have the same success rate as any other blade when I'm deploying it. If I pull on the flipper tab and the blade goes, I don't really care that it's a huge blade, figure it out, or I don't want the knife, right? It has to deploy. And obviously, again, anybody that's been following the channel will know that the one that I had the most problems with was the Peter Recenti full-size Satori. He makes those blades like 10 inches thick. They're fucking enormous heavy blades. And then he just puts a normal detent on there and hopes that it works. And I mean, that knife sucks, right? The action sucks, in my opinion. You can't flip it open unless you like manhandle the shit out of the flipper tab. It's just awful. So anyway, obviously that's a pet peeve of mine. It really pisses me off when makers make these huge blades and then, you have to really manhandle the flipper tab to deal with it. So, again, discussed on the mini Sabotage that you kind of have to fuck around with it to get it to ramp onto the detent. What he's done with the opiate is he's made a change to the way a detent ramps onto a tang from the get-go, from a mechanical standpoint, such that it benefits this knife. So there's actually two factors. One is that he's moved the detent into a weird place that gives better ramp potential, but he's also increased the size of the detent substantially. So what he's done is he's repositioned the detent such that when you go to close the knife, there's no ramping that, like, it's ramped right now. Like, right when I start to close it, it ramps onto the detent. So I don't have to push the flipper tab like I do on the Sabotage, right? Because if I go to close this, now it's stuck right there, and then I got to push it past, and then it closes. I don't have to do that on the opiate because he's positioned the detent such that in an interesting spot, and I'll show you in a minute, but he's positioned the detent in an interesting spot so that it ramps right away, so you don't have to worry about that. And then the physical size of the detent is huge. It's the largest detent I've ever seen on any knife. I joked with a friend the other day that it's the size of a golf ball. And what that means is that when you go to deploy the knife, applying a normal amount of pressure to a normally shaped flipper tab consistently results in the rocket speed, the firing out. I mean, look at that. Bam! I mean, it's so fast. It's a straight rocket. And you're able to get that with such a substantial blade because he's got this huge fucking detent that you're breaking. So let's go ahead and try to take a look here. So when we look down here, let me see if I can, oh, one sec. Okay. If we take a look in here, you can see the detent. So on this side, you can see the lock bar is in the locked position, right? So if we flip it over, you can see the detent ball right there. Behind the tang. And so that's what I'm saying. So not only, and I mean, look how fucking big that is. I mean, I guess on video it doesn't really look that big because you don't have anything to compare it to, but that's at least 2 to 3 times the size of all the regular detents on like all of my Thorburns and stuff. Maybe just twice the size, but it's huge. So anyway, how do I even show this to you guys? It's easy to see if you have the knife with you, but it's pretty hard. Let's see. What I'm trying to show you is that he's cut like a 90-degree angle out of the tang such that the flipper tab in the open position sits out in front of the lock bar. And apparently there's no way for me to easily show it to you, but when it's in the closed position, yeah, I'm not gonna, this is too hard to do on video, but when it's in the closed position, basically the detent is sitting here and the tang is like this and like this. So the tang actually is under the detent, and then there's like a 90-degree angle like this, like that, and the detent's sort of right in the middle of it. So when you go to close the knife, the detent is ramping, like right now, is ramping over the inside of the tang, right? So the tang, it's so hard to describe on video, I'm so sorry. The tang is swinging over and around the detent, and what that means is that it's not the bottom of the tang. Like, let's say this is your detent ball and my hand is the bottom of the tang in the open position. Normally, the bottom of the tang has to hit the detent ball, ramp over it, and keep going. But what we have here is something different. Whatever. I'm done trying to explain this to you guys because I can't show it to you. But anyway, he's wrapped the tang around the detent so that you don't have to sit there and ramp it with your finger. So I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that when he went to make his second model, mechanics was still something that he absolutely took into consideration, and he made improvements on the geometry from his first model. And now again, I'll reiterate, this is the only knife I've ever personally encountered that is this large and has this substantial of a blade, this heavy of a blade, and this front heavy of a blade that is ever opened like this. There is no other knife on the market with a blade this large that fires with that much force. So I like to joke that the opiate is more of a toy. It's so you can't even really put this thing in your fucking pocket, especially if you carry anything else in your pocket. It's huge, and I know Nati, he's got some big manly hands, and I'm sure it's great for him. But I'm a tiny little dude, and well, not so much anymore. I got pretty fat, but I'm a short little fucking dude, and I got short little fingers, and so this thing is absolutely massive. I mean, look at it compared to my hand. Look at that. Like, are you serious? Like, this is a normal size knife right here. That's normal size knife, and then we got ourselves an opiate. It's humongous, especially just because it's so wide. It's like twice the width of a regular knife. Anyway, so I always like to joke that it's a bit more of a toy, but it actually has the best, standard detent liner lock flipper mechanics of any knife that I've come across, and so. The reason that I'm like leaning into this so much is because I really want to reiterate that like I've had this issue with knives over time, is that like when you get into the really high end stuff, there seems to be less attention to things like mechanics or like how good the knife is at being a knife. It's sort of more about it as a piece of art. And what I like so much about Nati's work is that it gives you all of that knife stuff that you want. By the way, his edges are some of the sharpest edges. I mean, they come mirror out of the box. They're insane. So if you aren't worried about damaging the knives and you do want to cut with them, he gives you a knife that has a great cutting blade, is finished to absolute perfection. To the whole thing is a fucking mirror. It's insane. Again, it's all done by hand, and then he is able to sort of package all of that together and give you a full experience of a knife. And I think there's very few people doing it better or at the same caliber. And I'm just so honored to be able to have a chance at checking out these knives, because it's really put it into perspective, like why he drew so much money so early on in the process of making. And it's just clear that he's going to be a force to be reckoned with as time goes on. I cannot wait to see a mini opiate hopefully come from him. I cannot wait to see whatever he ends up doing for his third design. Not to say that he's necessarily working on that right now, but I just, hope it'll presumably come eventually. And I just... Guys, there's nothing else like this. If you've been sort of like looking at Black Snow Customs and looking at other knives at a similar price point, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, it's a lot of money to be spending on a knife. So if that's really where you're at, you have to own one of these. You have to. There's no, unless you really don't like the way they look, and I understand they're kind of weird shapes, and so if you really just don't like the way these knives look, then that's totally fine, right? Personal preference is totally fine. These are art. Not everybody's going to like a particular kind of art. That's fine. But like, if putting that aside, putting the shape aside, if you're attracted to these at all or whatever, you have to own one, because they're just a whole caliber beyond some of the other things I've tried. I've gotten to handle RJ Martins and all these other $10,000 knives and all kinds of crazy shit at shows. And, Stan Wilson, Michael Raymond, and Nati Amor have really been the ones that have been like, wow, hot damn. Bill Touch is another example there, but he's doing something a little bit different. I'm looking at these as, thick, overbuilt liner lock flippers. These are the best things on the market, in my opinion, hands down. I'm just absolutely enamored. So again, thank you so much to Mike for letting me check these out. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm still just astounded every time I pick one of these things up. I can't believe how good the work is. I can't believe how good the action is on this opiate. It really is something else. And, you just got to experience it for yourself. But really, guys, if you have an opportunity to buy one of these knives, I can't recommend it enough. I've gotten to try lots of cool stuff. I really like the knives that you get from other I don't want to use too many names because I don't want to talk down on anybody who's also doing a great job. But there's a lot of other knives at this price point that are really great, that are really amazing. And I still think that these take it a step beyond that. I still think these are a step above those other knives, because it's the same level of awesome plus really solid mechanics. And again, I just feel like the mechanics are an afterthought when I play with these $4,000, $5,000, and $6,000 knives. And again, that's not to say every knife, that's not to say every maker. Just generally speaking, I feel like when I play with those knives that the mechanics sometimes let me down. And in the case of Black Snow Customs, the mechanics were some of the best parts of the knives. And so I'm just absolutely, I'm mind completely blown at getting to play with these things. They are incredible. So again, big thanks to Nati for making the plunge and joining the knife market and giving us these amazing toys to play with. They're so freaking cool. Thank you again to Heels with Steel Mike for sending these along. I know you've been without them for a long time, so I'm looking forward to getting these packaged up and sent back to you. But thank you so much for letting me hang on to these things. I feel so privileged. And really, of all the knives that I've ever had come across the table, be it my knives or knives on loan, these are on another level. These really take it to the next level. I'm just so in love with his ability to finish all kinds of different materials, whether it's Damasteel, hand rub, micarta, doesn't matter. This guy will make it look the best it could possibly look. He bends materials to his will, and he is just an absolute master when it comes to polishing and finishing and just making everything go together like it was meant to be. So again, thank you all so much for watching. I don't have a good sign out for this one. I just gotta go because this was amazing. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you for sending these along. I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you all got to learn something about these knives, and I hope you buy one for yourself. So again, thank you, and I will see you next time.